Good evening, everyone. Welcome to 2023. Happy New Year and first ad hoc, I'm sure, of the new year for the Oakland Police Commission. It is January 2nd. This is the Militarized Equipment ad hoc. Two things on the agenda, I think, scheduling as well as the breaching policy. Why don't I start off with scheduling? I just wanted to note that we did have a discussion last time, and our next meeting is going to be not on the Monday, which I believe is Martin Luther King holiday, but the Wednesday of that week. Just a little bit of technical difficulties we're seeing in the chat. That's okay. Again, Wednesday, what is that, the 18th? Someone help me out.
Yep, that's the 18th.
Yep. Is that a time that everyone is available? Any conflicts? Excellent. Okay. So John, it was just that the Wednesday, January 18th will be our next meeting, making sure that there are no conflicts from that. Any thoughts? Great. Okay. Any other items outside of the explosive breaching policy or impact report before we get started that anyone can think of or wants to bring up? Excellent. Okay. Let's just get right to it then. Who is going to control the mouse here? Is it Lieutenant Toribio, Lieutenant Feb? Why don't you share your screen and get us started?
Got it, sir.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge both Lieutenant Feble and Lieutenant Toribio. Looks like you all did some edits since our last meeting, much appreciated. And we also did get an email from John who mentions, who had a couple of comments. Perhaps, why don't we start off with Lieutenant Toribio and Lieutenant Feble going through some of the edits that you have made, and then we'll get to the questions or concerns that we may have, starting with John, and then anybody else who wants to pick up from there. Does that work? Great, let's get at it. Whoever wants to.
Bill, do you want me to take this, or do you want to?
Yeah, please, Steve, go ahead, and then we'll. I also input John's suggestions into it, highlighted under blue. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, sure. So let me just give an overview. Lieutenant Feble, since you've got the copy up, I'll let you go hit any specific point you want to hit. But in particular, what I did with this revision, for lack of a better word, was I tried to categorically kind of group things together and simplify it. Any like little minor comment that had a question about, like, for example, one that comes to mind is a definition. There was a comment on, hey, there's a mention of breach here. Is that explosive breach, or what's the difference between breach and explosive breach? So if you just look on the definition section, now there's a definition for breach, and then there's a definition for explosive breaching. So that's essentially what I did. I included comments, and as Feble goes through it, you can see where I inserted a comment where there was some sort of a significant change or a question that was fairly significant that was answered, hopefully, in the text that's in the training bulletin.
Excellent. And Steve, am I correct in the last format? You transitioned it into what it would really actually look like in policy, right? In training bulletin format.
It was just a lot of it. Some of it was just stylistic to match other stuff, like having the section titles formatted a certain way and whatnot. So I did that. but the most significant changes to the context of the text, the actual training bulletin, it's going to be where I inserted comments or answered, replied specifically to comments that were inserted into the text. It might be easier if it's up to you, Bill. I can share my screen and go through it, or if you wanted to go through and hit the points.
Go right ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. If you guys give me a sec, I'll share my screen and I'll pull it up.
Lieutenant Febel, you'll have to stop sharing so that Lieutenant Trebio can begin sharing.
Okay. I hope this is working.
If you can make it a little bigger, it'll be easier to read.
This one looks like 15-01, not explosive breaching.
Okay,
Glad you're working on it though.
how about this one? Is this showing the right
That
screen?
looks like, yeah.
Okay, and let me make it bigger for folks. Okay. So in the overview, one of the questions that was asked that I felt compelled to respond to, or to keep the comment and make the note, was whether or not explosive breaching wanted to be used for rescue operations. And the answer is yes, the department wants to have this option in order to do so. And so what would that verbiage look like? So that was a question that was asked, and the answer is yes, we would like to, if it's done for the purposes of saving lives and preventing further injury, and there's non-explosive breaching options that just aren't practical or have failed. So that's where I inserted that comment. So the verbiage that I put here, I can't remember how much I inserted and how much I just kind of tweaked, but in a sense, there is a mention under the overview here that says that in the event of disasters and rescue operations, explosive breaching may be employed to rescue victims entrapped in buildings or other structures when conventional access is restricted or unavailable. And inclusive in that is when other things have failed. So that was to the point of using it during rescue operations. Any questions, comments, concerns with the verbiage here for that point? No? Okay.
While we're on the subject of rescue, how did you close the loop into authorized uses?
Let me get to that. Okay. I think Febel highlighted that. Sorry, I'm getting.
And Lieutenant Febel's hand is up if he.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah,
Please hop in.
just above under authorized uses, John, I think used some pretty good verbiage. I'm sorry, that'd be South. And it says circumstances where breaching would, and then in John's words, would assist when human life is at risk. I believe covers that quite well under authorized uses.
Lower.
Above. I apologize, sir. Above. I changed that the header on that one a little bit above. It should be in yellow.
Oh, got it.
Rate. Yep. The number 4 down, and then instead of insist in the preservation of life, we put would assist when human life is at risk.
The at-risk part. Sorry, I don't see that as something that
it's on mine. Yeah, John's correspondence today replied to me, and so I added it in there. It seemed like a good clarification.
What was that verbiage that you used?
After the word assist, when human life is at risk.
Actually, it's after the word circumstances where human life is at risk and explosive breaching would assist.
Sorry, guys. The header from Zoom is and I'm blocking my word stuff. I'm sorry, and one more time with that verbiage.
When human life is at risk and where explosive breaching would assist in the preservation of life.
Did I have that correct?
I think we're silent because we're wondering if we need the comment. But it looks otherwise right.
Okay, let me go back up here. Okay, so does that effectively close the loop regarding this comment on using it during rescue operations? Does this sentence encompass the spirit of what we want in terms of rescue operations? Okay, for now, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, I think it does. Now I can imagine someone who perhaps isn't as familiar with this at this point as we are, who might say the fourth bullet point is maybe is a little bit more broad than they might like. And I'm wondering how we think about, or what, I know that there are many levels of authorization before you get to the point of explosive breaching, right? The tactical team has to come out. They have to make a decision as to whether or not to breach. There has to be an actual decision about whether explosive breaching is coming out and whether those are transported to wherever the incident is. Those things to me, because I sort of can think about this policy and think about how it plays out in a real life situation, makes me understand that there are multiple levels of authorization before you get to the point where you make that consideration, circumstances where human life is at risk and explosive breaching would assist in the preservation of life. How do we make it so that those levels are reflected in this document? Are they reflected in this document so that it doesn't seem like it's just a open season?
Jesse, could we say where reasonable circumstances have been exhausted or are not practical and human life is still at risk?
Yeah, I think that to Mr. Shea's point, having something here in this authorization section, maybe it's a format issue where if it was done more kind of step based or conditional, it may make it like an easier read for people who are looking at the policy. That, okay, I understand there's this like set process for authorizing when exactly an explosive breach is going to happen. Am I off base on that? Okay.
That was my thought. I also like Lieutenant Bevel's suggestion of sort of when reasonable, what was it? Reasonable. Help us out. Help me out.
So yeah, you would say where reasonable options have proven ineffective or are impractical, and yet there's a continuation for risk of human life.
Got it. And sorry, Ms. Tu, did you have your hand up? Sorry.
I did, but please keep going.
Okay. Okay. Let's see this comment here. Okay, so I think I'm getting what the message is here on what is looking to be included in the authorization, so that it reads and just kind of explicitly states that there is a process by which explosive breaching as an option is reached versus something that is just kind of used kind of freely.
Sorry, I'm going to jump back in. If you could scroll back down, I'm wondering if, so it says, if it would assist in the preservation of life. I'm wondering if it would be any stronger if you flipped it to would prevent the loss of life, and if that would be a helpful change to make.
Got it. And Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah, I was wondering whether if this is really about rescue operations, why rather than circumstances, which actually is pretty that's to me where the really broad thing is to say rescue operations where human life is at risk, if that's what the intent is. In terms of Commissioner Shea's, sort of what the process is, there is and there should be a section on legal and procedural rules, which I think is actually where that discussion of what has to happen procedurally, who has to approve, all that stuff before this thing is authorized. That would be, I think, where that would belong. I mean, there's also even, I think in the prohibited uses, there's something about if something else would work better. So from my perspective, it's this particular thing, it's more about not making it so broad that those circumstances could be read as a lot of different things. If the intent is really for rescue operations, why not just say that?
Got it. Got it. Okay.
So that brings me actually back to something that I think we thought of or grappled with a little bit when we were talking about case six and assault rifles, which is that there probably is another policy that discusses some of those legal and procedural rules, such as the standard of what it would take to send out a tactical team, right? Isn't there like a tactical team policy that might cover something like that? And whether we should just reference it or actually put the rule in here, because then we run into that problem of, well, having the rule in multiple places and the standard in multiple places and having to change multiple policies each time there is a change. So I guess the first question is there another policy that dictates when a tactical team is sent out? And if so, how do we best incorporate that or make reference to that here in this policy?
Yeah, that is a good point, and having that kind of unnecessary redundancy where that one policy changes now it affects multiple policies could be an issue. So I'll look at K5 in particular for the tactical team. There's obviously, because just given the when we started to incorporate training with explosive breaching, it's not mentioned anywhere in DGO K5. And I don't, I think there are separate like training bulletins for different types of munitions like SIM already, which the committee has discussed. I mean, this is kind of its own beast, but I'll look to that point and see if versus kind of repeating stuff or trying to restate things, footnote it through a reference to an applicable general order or training bulletin. Ms. Tu?
Real quick, the last sentence, I think you might be missing the word minimum to only use the minimum effective amount of explosive materials necessary.
Can you point me to that last sentence here?
Yeah, to only use the minimum effective amount.
Thank you. Okay. If everybody's okay, I'll go back to where scrolling up earlier in the document where there was some more significant change. And I'll let you guys just take a look, but I added this just as a general term to understand, what breaching is. And then obviously explosive breach has its own definition. Ms. Tu?
You just passed the training section. For that, one thing I wanted to call out is the state law requires that policies include the training that is going to be required. And so I think with the changes, it's a little bit less clear what the required training is. And so it might be good to list out exactly what the courses are, or just have something a little bit more specific about what the required training is.
Okay. So part of the reason why this is kind of worded the way it is. So let me break down in maybe paragraph format isn't the best format, but specifically just so the committee understands, breachers need to attend a tactical operations entry team school and become members of the entry team, and then they need to attend an accredited tactical / explosive breaching course. And the reason why I didn't name one specific one is because that can change or others become available. And example of that would be like our firearms instructor course. There are some that are certified by post that are 40 hours, some that are 80 hours, and they all cover everything. Some cover more things than others. So I didn't want to pigeonhole by naming just a specific class, or now that class becomes like decertified or no longer offered. And so now what do we do if we've specifically named a class? And then beyond that is internal training, which is outlined here. But before I go on for too long, Ms. Tu, I know your hand's up, but JT, did you have something to add here?
Yeah, Steve, I was just going to agree with you sort of in this, that we do try and, especially with something like this, where it's relatively esoteric and specific, that we may have to find different courses for. Saying the actual name of the course is probably going to be problematic. One suggestion maybe was just those, I see like 3 kind of requirements in there, possibly to bullet point it out, might to help it out, say, hey, they have to go to entry team school, be a current entry team member, and then go to the accredited course, and maybe that will sort of make it easier than like you said, the paragraph.
Got it. And Ms. Tu?
Yeah. At a personal level, I definitely understand that desire for flexibility, especially since you don't want to be in a situation where a course gets removed from underneath you. I think the part that I'm concerned about is the law does say that you have to have the training. And the other one thing that I think might, well, hopefully it will be a relief is for you to know is that the state law requires revisiting these policies on the annual basis. So I know it's not exactly a relief to me either, but it does help relieve some of that what if the course changes from under you anxiety.
I think I'm grasping what you're saying. Is there a particular verbiage you're looking for that I should jot down here to when I revisit this to add?
I mean, I would like to see the names of the courses. If you wanted to add a little bit of a release valve, so in case a course disappears from underneath you, you could add a sentence that says, in the event that the training is no longer available or has been replaced with a different course, who's the authorizer? The breaching sergeant or whoever it is you want to designate may recommend an alternate course and must report this to, and then have some way for it to report back into the public view.
Got it. And Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah, I had another idea, which is that if this is what's required by Post, and it's Post that might change it, Post publishes their courses listings. You could maybe just say, the explosive breaching class as required by California Post, and then reference that. And then if it changes, then it's accessible.
Okay, one thing, I'm not sure if it is the case with explosive breaching, if they have post-certified courses, and if they do, if they're, I don't believe that there are mandates. They may be post recommendations. And that's even the same for like the tactical school, right? So there's no, they have post certified SWAT schools. However, they're not mandated requirements. They're just recommendations. But I see your point, and I mean they're kind of the kind of standing authority on practices. So having reference to that would probably be the way to go. So I will note that. Mr. Shea.
Question for you. So, and I'm thinking of a second alternative to naming the courses. There's the second paragraph that you have there. Courses shall be conducted by a certified instructor and minimally include the following. Are those, is that the accredited tactical explosive breaching course that is being referenced in the first paragraph, or is that for all other courses, like the refresher trainings and such?
Yeah, I believe this is for the initial class that needs to be taken. Cardona, if you're monitoring, maybe if you can add 2 cents here. But I believe that what these things were these were the minimum things that were covered through the course that our team took in order to like accredit themselves for it. These were like the main things that were covered in the course. And so it was put here as like, hey, the course kind of minimally has to ensure that it covers these. Chris, you monitoring by chance?
Yes, sir. Yeah, yes, that's exactly it. So where everybody to be accredited or to be certified as an explosive breacher had to attend that the course by a certified instructor.
So, I mean, does that, knowing that second paragraph makes reference to exactly what is supposed to go into that breaching course, doesn't that satisfy AB 481 because it names what training has to be in that course?
Yeah, I believe so. There's also kind of like another like intangible kind of safeguard, and that is this section here, right? So, we can't have an operator just go to, is cool as Joe Turner is, go to Joe Turner's explosive breaching course, and on his flyer he says we show explosive safety and handling, explosive breaching hazards and safety fundamentals, right? It kind of what this line is intended to do is that the class has to be vetted through a breaching sergeant on the team, like a team leader on the team that is saying, you know what, this is going to set this operator up for success and give them what they need in order to have kind of like the minimum knowledge and testing, because they're practical tests that are in these classes that are pass fail. And so this is kind of like another layer, is that it's not just an operator that signs up for any breaching class. It has to be approved by the breaching sergeant.
That kind of strikes me as the training that has to be completed, and the components of that has to be completed before they can be used.
I'm sorry, how do you mean?
Oh, sorry. That wasn't a criticism. That I'm just saying that seems to me to be a listing of the courses and the subgroups of the courses that are required before a person may
attend. Okay, I got you.
May use, and so I think explicitly calling that out in the second paragraph, or making sure that it's clear that the second paragraph refers to the accredited breaching course that must be completed before anyone can be an explosive breacher, addresses the AB 481 sort of requirement.
Got it. Beyond these two paragraphs, now goes to the internal training. So there are a couple layers to this. Has to be refresher training for explosive breachers, minimum of 10 hours a year. And part of that refresher training has to include practical or physical or tactile, however you want to characterize it, construction and detonation of an explosive breach charge. And it's done in tandem with somebody else. So there's minimum 10 hours a year, where explosive breachers, to maintain their accreditation or title as a certified breacher, they have to complete that training. There's additional training that is added here that does not count towards the minimum standard for staying certified, and that is going to like research and development training. So if we have an explosive breacher that is just going to R&D training to find out new techniques and different things, that is not going to satisfy the training required to maintain their certification, because that's not hands-on. So there has to be that hands-on component. So kind of concentric with this is during entry team training twice annually, there's going to be an explosive breaching component to the team training, to the scenario training. And then anybody categorized as an explosive breacher that doesn't complete and meet these annual training requirements, they're no longer authorized to not only deploy, but to transport any type of explosive breaching charges or devices. Any further questions on the training section? No, we have a lot to kind of weed through and revisit to make certain points clear, but any other points before moving on? Okay, the next section, explosive breacher selection. So here, essentially, because one component of this is they have to be an entry team member. So that process in and of itself kind of already sets a foundation for having candidates who can be certified as breachers. So they have to apply for, get endorsed for, attend, pass, and be selected to be on the entry team before they can even entertain becoming an explosive breacher. So that's one layer to this. You got to be an active entry team member. When somebody now elects that I'd like to attend an explosive breacher course, I'd like to be an explosive breacher on the team, they not only need their chain of command approval to attend the course, and that's inherent for anybody taking any class. The department has that built in already. So, me, Steve Toribio, I need to get an endorsement through my chain of command to attend this explosive breacher course. However, what this training bulletin is saying is that not only does my chain of command have to approve of it, but my tactical team leader has to endorse me attending as well. So let's say in my day-to-day job, I'm making par and I'm doing enough to earn the endorsement, but in tactical team training, I'm maybe not doing so great. Whereas normally for virtually every other class that I attend and I get chain of command approval and I can go, I need approval from my tactical team leader as well. So before it's even endorsed to attend a class, you have to be endorsed from your chain of command and your tactical team leader. And then the last sentence here gives just some metrics for consideration that the tactical team leader needs to consider when he or she is giving a positive or a negative endorsement. And that's just how their tactical aptitude in training and in the field, their dependability, mathematical aptitude, and then decision making before endorsing it. So, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it looks good. The first line, I'm thinking maybe instead of may elect, maybe it should say may apply. Because elect, I think, usually means the person can choose on their own without any approval. And
Thank
what
you.
what you've just described really is an application process. So
Agreed. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, much more accurate. Okay. Any questions, comments or concerns regarding the breacher selection? Okay, moving on to authorization. Okay, so I think we kind of touched on this. I have points to consider, and Lieutenant Feppel and I'll go back and iron this stuff out. Anything else as you guys are reflecting before we go down to the next section?
I just want to recognize that the changes that we're seeing to this section are that there is no longer a section that has, or no longer a bullet point about exigent circumstances, but instead we're getting right to the point of preserving or saving human life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Looking at the comments, I think you know, when looking to like define what is exigent, let's just go straight to kind of like what we're looking to do, and I think that's what hopefully we're resolving here. Mr. Lindsay.
yeah, you'll see this in the comments I sent earlier today. This is really the section on authorized uses. And so my one suggestion was that this be renamed from authorization, which really there's other sections here that are about authorization, but this is really about authorized uses, which is what's required by the law. So renaming it authorized uses, I think would make sense.
I added
here.
all those on mine, Mr. Lindsay.
Okay.
The one I shared, yeah, I put those in there. It's just I
Okay.
shared them with Steve in a very selfish manner. I'll do that here shortly.
Okay. And then the other comment that I made was about definitions, which it was kind of noted at the bottom as they're being needed. And I'm just wondering where the department is on those definitions for barricaded subject, particularly, but also for hostage and active shooter situations.
Oh, is this in the lower
No, it's
section?
on page 3. Yeah.
Got it.
Right there.
Yeah. Okay. So these just need to be cited.
And that's, you know, we're going to want to see them, you know,
Right.
because if I don't know, do they already exist in another document? What document would that be? What is the definition? Because, you know, it's look, a lot of the conversations we're having with departments around the definition of barricaded subject, you know, it can be pretty wide open.
Yeah.
So
I believe barricaded and hostage are, if not defined, then heavily alluded to and described, I guess, in DGOK 5. Active shooter, I'd have to look. This may just be a term that, because we've done active shooter training, and this just may be. I don't want to misspeak, but I'll get these references. I'll make sure that they're presented. Okay. I know there was discussion last time regarding like vehicles. I'm hoping that this added sentence here kind of covers our thinking behind using it on a vehicle. Ms. Tu.
Yeah, thanks for getting us started on this. One thing I was wondering as I was reading this is what it means for a risk to be significant. It's in the blue section. Explosive breaching devices shall only be utilized on vehicles where the detonation would not pose significant risk to its occupants or bystanders. And as I was reading this, I was trying to understand what the word significant means and how someone reading this would be able to tell what may or may not be a significant risk.
No, I understand that is fairly open and ambiguous. I think this falls in line with a lot of other examples where it's hard to set, it's difficult to set a hard line. And that, you know, like so much of these decisions that are made on the fly, they're judgment calls. But I do see the optics of this and how this, it could stand for a tighter definition. JT?
Yeah, thanks. I recognize, I think Lieutenant Tribune and I both kind of recognize the issue, which is that different people's risk calculus is different. And we, I think that the group and everyone would be probably feel better, at least knowing that a specific risk calculus was required. Those are hard to come about, though. Significant things like those words, especially when you're talking about risk, because people's risk calculus is so different, because the idea of some of the risks that police officers take even in their day-to-day is just anathema to people who don't take those sorts of risks and would never imagine them doing so. Is just a little different lens. I think significant is a word that, however, does have some meaning within when you're talking about things that we can see and we can kind of draw parallels to. So, for instance, when we talk about significant bodily injury, which is a term that's defined in the California Penal Code, for instance, so it does evoke that same type of feeling where significant bodily injury means someone who is, you know, badly injured, broken bone or something. It's not a great risk, but it is not just a minor risk. It is pretty medium. So this sets a pretty high bar for when we were talking about the detonation. So just maybe thinking about that, because it is going to be pretty hard to define, especially a specific risk calculus that people should take without really going into some specifics that might be too much for this policy.
Yeah, that's a good point about the significant. Trying to define that would be difficult, and it also might make it difficult to understand. I wonder, up above a little bit, just about half a page, there's that bit about endangering lives and the preservation of life, and preventing the loss of life. And I wonder if any of that is language that's meant to encompass everything in this section. If it isn't, then maybe that can be added to the part about vehicles. And if it is, then maybe we should it can get more clear that it's meant to encompass everything in the authorization section.
Got it. And yeah, I do think that if we're titling a section authorization or authorized uses, it is all encompassing. And then when we get into finer points of specific scenarios, I don't think anything, unless it's explicitly stated, supersedes kind of the conditions or safeguards of the main header section. Okay.
So sorry, just while you were talking about that, I went back to K5, which does not define barricaded subjects at all. It makes it reference to them a couple times, but has nothing approaching anything like the definition. There's a reference in there to training bulletin 3P. However, the K5 was made in more than 20 years ago, and training bulletin 3P has now been superseded by the armored vehicle and the DAT team and those three policies that were made a couple of years ago now.
That policy has not been superseded. It's still in effect. 3P.
Lieutenant Turner, didn't you provide us via email the definition of barricaded subject? It was, I recall, a policy that was not on the DMS website.
Yeah, it is 3P, the barricaded subject incident. It's not on DMS yet because it has specific tactical responses to these type of incidents. I'll throw it in the chat, but yeah, I think this was on a meeting where previously.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for the other policy where that came up, the department pulled the definition out of the unavailable to the public policy and just pasted it straight into the policy.
Okay, I'll deconflict with, or check with, JT, ensure we get this squared away. I don't want this to, linger at the next meeting. I want to make sure we have everything defined. So we're all, on the same page as to what these things mean, or at least where the definitions can be found. So we
Yeah, I
can
mean, it's kind of the core of this
Yeah.
whole exercise, I think.
Agreed. Okay, perfect. Okay, I think as we're going down this list, we stopped here. So these are considerations that the tactical and incident commander and explosive breachers need to consider before an explosive breach is done. It's the ages, presence of the potential drug lab, that other hazards that can create a negative consequence that outweigh the needs and benefits. And of course, all of these are additional considerations to the stipulations outlined in this authorized uses section. Ms. Tu?
Would it be possible to add maybe just one sentence, making it clear what the consideration direction should be? Like whether so I look at considering the ages of those within the area to be breached. And I don't know if that means if someone is young or old or neither, whether breaching is to be recommended or not to be recommended. If the presence of a potential drug lab means you should definitely use breaching, or you should definitely not use breaching, or you should really think before using breaching. And so just a little bit of more direction for what the decision makers in these situations should be thinking when they come upon these considerations.
Got it. Making some notes here.
Yeah, I second that. I know that the previous version of this policy did say young and elderly should, and with the, I can't remember if I added it in, but the implication that explosive breaching would not be used. And I know Sergeant Cardona talked about that these are some of the things that they think about, whether there's someone who's very young or very, very old, or there are hazards inside, such as glass, explosives, gas lines, things like that, that would tend to make the explosive breacher not use explosive breaching. I imagine that's probably in the training. But in a policy, I think some direction would be good, especially when we're thinking about after action considerations and evaluations.
Agreed. So I'll check with offline. I'll check with Cardona to see if there are in the training offered and whatnot, like hard line age differences and whatnot. But I would imagine no. I'd imagine these are all considerations because it's so impossible to think of every situation. But I'll check with him.
Yeah, and it may not be that there's a hard line no, otherwise it'd be in prohibited uses, but it would be some direction that we're wondering is, do the presence of these factors discourage the use, right? Because right, it's unclear at the moment.
Okay, got it. Got it. This is like category titles likely gonna change, I believe, based on Mr. Lindsay's input, that authorized usage is gonna head this section. I apologize. I'll get that copy from Lieutenant Febble. This section does essentially kind of break down parameters for like the execution of an explosive breach. So it's like procedural / safeguards / points that need to be followed, meaning first being that there's a minimum of or at least 2 breachers, that the breachers should be the ones, when possible, to be the ones that are actually doing the scouting of the location versus relying on another team member. And so it's best to get eyes direct if I'm the one that's going to be constructing the device. But there are various points here that that are listed procedurally for constructing and executing a breach. I'm not sure how much folks are able to review this outright. Are there any
We
questions?
had this was here before under, I think under deployment considerations. I think it's something that we have looked at before.
Okay. Okay. I'll
And I
just,
think even
Oh,
the fire extinguisher was the thing that got added.
yes. So, and I should have added a comment since I remember that being a significant point of discussion. So, talked with Cardona, just to kind of educate myself too on like the prep and whatnot, and very feasible that, and in practice actually, that as part of their kits they have these fire extinguishers. So just having this in policy, there's no issues whatsoever of making this like a mandatory component of the kit that goes out in the field. So that was one that was we looked to kind of like put a hard line into. Same thing with protective gear, just for their own safety. For mutual aid, I know this was a point as well. Line here that says when we're providing mutual aid, we follow our policy for the application of the construction and the detonation or execution of an explosive brief. And I know that there was additional talk about mutual aid coming into our jurisdiction, and then that's in a later section. But specifically as it goes to us performing explosive breaches, whenever we do it, we need to follow the conditions and meet all the requirements for this training bulletin. Anything else in this section before we go to prohibited uses? All right. So going to prohibited uses. It can obviously become problematic, or it adds unpredictable variable when it is unknown what the medium is that's being breached. So the condition here is only when preservation of life is necessary that an explosive breach shall not be done if we don't know what the medium is that we're breaching through. So it's only under a circumstance where we absolutely need to preserve life that we can use an explosive breach on an unknown medium. This statement, I know that can sound kind of heavy, but this doesn't absolve the other considerations that need to be considered as well, that are listed up above. And it's contingent that there is specific articulable facts that would necessitate, like we need to be able to describe exactly how life-preserving measures or why life-preserving measures need to be taken if we're going to be conducting a breach on an unknown medium.
Question for you before you move on to the next one.
Yes.
Who makes that decision?
Let me add that. I would, in my head, and it should be stated explicitly here, but since we're discussing it, I'd appreciate feedback. The breacher up to the incident commander. Chris, what's your understanding of this?
So I would say exactly what you said, sir. The call would have to be made sometimes, maybe on the spot. And if the breachers done the scout, and he or she should know whether they know the medium or not. But if the alternative would be the loss of life, I think the call needs to be made at any point.
So
up to the
got it, breacher or incident commander.
Yes, sir.
So let me think about how that would play out. You have a barricaded subject. They have a weapon. There are some facts that are known to somebody that make it seem like they're about to use that weapon on somebody, whether it's an active shooter situation, a hostage situation, or whatever it might be. You have to, And in sort of going through and figuring out whether sort of making a decision about the breach, the breacher has no idea or can't figure out what the wall is made of, or what's through the wall, or what the door is made of, or whatever it is that they're trying to go through. And as they're, I suppose the way it would play out is as they're trying to figure it out, maybe someone from the robot team says, hey, they're picking up the gun and they're pointing at somebody and they're acting a little funny. Is that kind of where the situation where we're going to? Like, and then the breacher just says, go.
Yeah, I would consider that. I mean, obviously it depends on the behavior, right? So just in the vacuum of this question, I'm the breacher and someone's like, hey, he's got the gun. Me personally, I would need more at that point, right? And I think in
So
reality,
let me push it a little bit then. Is it the imminent loss of life where this would come into play? As opposed to just preservation of life is necessary?
LT, can I answer that real quick? I think that's a pretty good example, sir, that you gave. Yes. And additionally, if the loss of life were to occur, let's say the robot saw something like you described, the explosive breaching charge that would be placed to attempt to gain entry would not necessarily be the only access point that we would try to gain. There'd be alternative access points, secondary breach points, even tertiary breach points, only because we'd have to get in there. So the other methods would not necessarily be the same, but they would just probably take longer. So whatever means that we could get in there as fast as we possibly can to save lives would go into effect at that point.
Would you lose a lot if you just said imminent loss, where there was imminent loss of life, as opposed to just where the preservation of life is necessary?
Got it. Is this like
you all are the experts. You all know how long it's going to take to set up the charge, what it take, the decision making. I'm wondering, I'm just wondering, do you lose a lot if it's imminent loss of life versus where the preservation of life is necessary? Because one is clearly a much smaller set of circumstances than the other. Right. Although I do understand, like, you might want to also preserve the use for rescue operations. This one's a little bit broader than just, hostage situations or active shooter situations.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I think you're saying that there's more value in one phrase versus the other, and I would like this policy to reflect whatever shows the greater value. I don't know if that makes sense. JT, I see your hands up. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I think that it sounds like the calculus for the entry team is going to be similar to when they would start taking risks against their own person that they normally wouldn't. So normally, for instance, we don't do things like dynamic entry or drive into locations unless basically there's imminent loss of life or we need to preserve life. They're kind of mean the same thing. So when the officers start taking more risks upon them, in themselves, that they're entering a hostile situation where it's much more likely that they're going to get injured, is when they feel like that they need to rescue someone. So I think probably around the same. I think maybe let us kick it around a little bit. I think preservation of life imminent loss of life is probably going to be totally feasible. But yeah, I think it's basically the same thing. What they're all and hopefully that coincides with what the expectation here is that we're not taking risks, just like the officers are not taking a lot of unnecessary risks. We're not taking these risks with using this on an unknown surface unless it's really important.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to, since you mentioned it, it looks like you may have also taken out the dynamic entry portion that was at the bottom of the old prohibited use section. Is that kind of, was the reasoning kind of the same, or?
I think if there's an explosive, I think I'm seeing explosive breach as like a characteristic of a dynamic entry. It's yeah, I'll look back and see, but just offhand, I think if I remove something, it's because I felt it was probably superfluous, given that just the intrusive nature of the explosive breach, that it was kind of like, man, if guys are going in, this explosive breach it's just on that same level. So, but I'll look. Yeah, do you recall specifically what it mentioned about dynamic entry?
So it was talking about dynamic entry for other law enforcement personnel, but it made me think that whether there is a difference between explosive breaching and dynamic entry.
I think they're going, and Chris, feel free to jump in here, but I think if it's to the point where we're doing an explosive breach, a dynamic entry is hand in hand with it. Like, we're not going to blow open a door or break open a wall if we're not needing to go inside right then and there. But Chris, check my math here. Let me know if I'm off base on that.
No, you're correct. I think there is certain charges that we do build to create ports, but that is going to conjunction with a breach to make entry. So we'll always be, I would say for the most part, we'd be making entry into it, into whatever location at the same time.
Okay, and I'll touch base with you too. If there are instances like you're saying where it is a port and we're still going to hold and look inside or whatever, I'll touch base with you too, so we can include that.
Thank you, guys. Also, on the same point, sorry, I keep things. So to the extent that you're using that there is an exception here, right, and that and we're looking at such uses require specific articulable facts that would necessitate an explosive breach.
Mm-hmm.
How is that different than just a standard explosive? Is it just the same considerations that might make you choose an explosive breach in the first place?
Let me think about that for 1 second. So let me ensure I'm understanding your question. There's a set of considerations already that where like explosive breaching is kind of like a worst case scenario. And now we're saying that, hey, we need specific articulable facts for this specific type. Or is there any other, are these like on top of the ones that are standard to this training bulletin?
Right.
Correct. Okay. Yeah.
It's not, I'm not suggesting one way or the other. I'm just wondering if there is a difference and whether there should be or not.
I think the distinction is there's a prohibited use for detonating an explosive breaching charge or device on an unknown medium. So that's a prohibited use, but we're specifically stating that, well, there is an exception, and that is, imminent loss of life or preservation of life. And there needs to be something said to how maybe this is less of a consideration and more of a state the specific articulable facts that lead you to believe that there's imminent loss of life or that preservation of life is necessary. I think that's what this is trying to say.
I think that gets more towards hitting that exception that you're trying to meet. Yes.
An example would be like our canine policy, where we can't deploy if a person is over a certain age or under a certain age, unless there's command approval, and that commander needs to be able to articulate the facts that lead them to believe that the person is in immediate threat of loss of life or serious injury. So it's kind of like, hey, look, this is generally prohibited, but if you're gonna do it, you need to state specific articulable facts as to what led you to believe that the set of circumstances exist that you say existed. Okay. This was a big one as well. I hope this is explicit. If it's not, I'm all for making it as explicit as possible, that we're not throwing or targeting people or animals with these breaching charges or devices. Everybody okay with that? And then to cover the mutual aid, and this is having other agencies come to us during mutual aid. This prohibits us from utilizing mutual aid for the purpose of bypassing like prohibitions outlined in this training bulletin. So like, here's an example. We are not allowed to do explosive breaching through the course of a normal or standard search warrant. Like, hey, you know what? We're gonna explode this, bust open this door on the search warrant, just as a matter of course, because we have the ability to. So that's prohibited from us. However, Fremont PD, they have it where they can use explosive breaching whenever they want. You know what? Let's call Fremont PD over here so they can do this, and then they can serve our search warrant, and then they can blow open that door. So that is the intention behind this line here. It's like, you know what, we can't start calling other agencies here just to use that because we're not allowed to. This is also like in the spirit of, again, I'll go back to K9. So for example, we're not allowed to deploy canines on suspects of stolen vehicles. So even if someone's in a stolen car and they run into a yard, we're not allowed to deploy a canine to search for that person, even though, you know, we believe they may be armed, etc. If it's just a stolen car, we can't deploy a canine. We can't now in turn call CHP or Alameda County Sheriff's Office because they'll search for, they have a much lower standard. We can't just call their dog now. Hey, they're allowed to search for it. We'll use their dog. So this is along the spirit of that. Anything with this line? Can it be modified? Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah, I think it's good. And what I sent along earlier today, I just suggested adding something which is actually already in the mutual aid policy, which is basically that any outside agency would be briefed on OPD's policies with respect to explosive breaching. That is, the mutual aid policy says prior to deployment, outside mutual aid units shall respond where they shall be briefed on, provide copies of applicable OPD policies. So it's a little bit redundant, but I think it's useful to put in there.
Yeah, I agree. Even if there is a separate thing, I'm completely, you know, at least me and anybody, please feel free to have that, you know, listed here, that we're not looking to circumvent our own policies by having other agencies with less tight policies come in to do our job.
I just wanted to, two things. One, I put that sentence that with my own things. I put that sentence into the chat so that you have it, but I also want to recognize that this represents a shift from our previous conversations about mutual aid. We have had lots of discussions about mutual aid and about what that looks like and how Oakland will respond to other agencies that have lower standards on their equipment. And this is, I think, the first time that this has been explicitly put into a policy. And so I want to recognize that, and I think that represents a fundamental shift in a good direction.
Got it. I'm sorry, my copy and paste is not working. I just don't want to lose this chat message. So if you guys give me just like 2 seconds, I just want to type this in real quick. Okay, got it. Okay. their post-deployment responsibilities, and it's categorized here per officer or per team member or per participant in the explosive brief. So there is the incident/tactical commander responsibilities. This is primarily the reporting of the deployment of military equipment. As I'm looking at this now, based on conversation that I was having earlier in a prior meeting, and I'm just brainstorming, I'm wondering if it's better to truncate this to mention that reporting should be done per current law and or policy versus hardlining things that need to be reported, and then this changes. So maybe add this into an appendix or something. So and I'm just thinking out loud on that. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Okay.
What's the current military notification, equipment notification form look like? Does it include the things that are listed here, or more, less?
Yeah, this is where I ripped it from. I ripped this from the current form. And, again, if that form changes, now we have that disparity between the working form and this policy. So I'm just going to include a note, unless somebody has an objection, to rework this to make it whatever the current law/policy is for reporting, and then refer to it in the appendix.
Yeah, in 2 weeks, Steve, that's all going to be captured live in Vision.
Oh, perfect. There you go. Okay.
This too?
I don't have an objection. I'm not sure if what visibility people would have into what the post-deployment report would look like. And I'm also wondering if that would change the timeline for when the report would be returned or submitted, or who that report would go to, or how visibility into the report might happen.
So all that's going to be captured in our Vision system, just like other military notifications as required. It's our main tracking system that notifies the PIO in accordance to the law. And it's very easy for us to output the data from that system. It's much more accurate than just simply hoping that somebody fills out a piece of paper and gets it out to the right people in a timely and accurate manner. So it's a good build-in, cost of department over $120,000, and it should be going out hopefully in a couple of weeks.
So I think that Ms. 2 was getting more at how we can ensure that how we are going to know what information is captured and what we can be looking for from a public facing side, as opposed to what you may internally have.
I know that we had the counsel on it, Dr. Grossman, and it captures all the specific information required by the law.
Do we know what that requirement is? I'm wondering, is it possible that it would be much different than what we see here?
No, it's not much different.
This is in terms of, you're asking in terms of time, like when, like we have an explosive breach, when is this data going to be made available? Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm quite understanding the question. Is it the content or the time in which the content is released?
Both.
So my understanding is that the law says that we have to record it publicly within 60 days, but the Vision notification system would by default, as soon as it's complete, notify our PIO and team. So that would be very quickly. And then looking at this right here, everything that is currently on here from Lieutenant Toribio is on there to also include who authorized the use of it. So whichever military equipment piece of data was out there. So yes, it has all of this information pretty much exactly.
Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's confusing to me, at least, is that I mean, it's really great to hear that there's a system in place, and not just for this equipment, but for all the other military equipment. Because it's in the explosive breaching policy, it seems like these are the things that are going to be recorded for any military equipment use. And there's a software to do that. Referencing that might make it more clear, because there's a reference here to armored vehicles, right? And it's like, well, why are armored vehicles in the explosive breaching policy? Because that's the system that's going to record all military equipment use. I think that's as I understand it, right? So, but this is the only policy I've seen so far that makes reference to that. I mean, some of this is based on the armored vehicle policy, which does have some data points that have to be recorded and who they're going to be reported to and how they're going to be also reported publicly. So that I think that was a useful, perhaps, template. But I think that is part of the confusing thing here, is that this is a list of data points that apply to all types of military equipment, not just to explosive breaching. And so that includes some things that wouldn't necessarily be relevant to explosive breaching.
Yes, point taken. And I think that, a recall back to the things we were saying about references to other policies. If this is just kind of like one component of, or one category of military equipment, and all military equipment requires a certain type of reporting footnote or reference that reporting procedure in this specific policy, and that way it all just kind of recalls the main document or policy that breaks down that criteria and that reporting. So, okay, I'll revisit this. That said, regarding the reported use, there are other requirements that we're stating, and that is that like the breacher needs to complete the associated crime or supplemental report, collect and dispose of any remnants from the explosive charge, and maintain their own log, either notebook or computer file, kind of documenting the breaches that they conducted or participated in. And this includes training. So it's in a sense just a comprehensive log that every breacher is going to have to maintain to document their training and field deployment of any explosive breaches. And then another stipulation for the SOS commander, for Lieutenant Febble here, to maintain a master log of all explosives in inventory and make reporting regarding the use and storage of the devices. Anything before the next header? Okay. Next, in inspection and storage, I think that I left this verbiage in large part alone because it's very specific in its reference to the Bureau of ATF and whatnot. I did have a question. I'll go over this with Chris. No need to take the committee's time, just on the specific verbiage of nomenclature for some terms here. Talks about purchases of these things, and they are registered. Certain components, anyway, are registered with ATF. Conducting audits of breaching materials, and that audit is submitted to the SOD captain, which is Support Operations Division, encompasses the Special Operations section by the end of January, and it's an annual audit. Then the last section is the required notification for the inquiry and complaint process. Anything to this point? Okay, so thank you guys for the feedback. Lieutenant Febble and I and Lieutenant Cardona will have another version at the next meeting for this. Anything else? All right.
Just two.
Yeah, just wanted to say much appreciation from me to everyone who worked on this, Lieutenant Febble, anyone else who were able to get this out with plenty of time for us to review over the holidays. One thing I was wondering is what kind of timing we should be expecting for the impact report, just to make sure that we're allocating enough time to review.
So Sergeant Cardona is very busy man because of his skill sets, many of them. But he just returned from vacation. We did discuss really the big need now is just to make sure our inventory and product expiration dates are up to date, and then we'll be able to provide the ad hoc with that. I can't speak with Sergeant Cardona if he's still on the line, how long it might take to conduct that inventory.
So we have some things already, that's already something that's, some of the stuff is already taken care of. However, I just need to clarify with you exactly what is needed, what else is needed. And then I don't foresee it being too long.
Good. So hopefully we'll be able to put out a draft to everybody by the end of this week. And then my colleagues will give me their input, which is always very valuable. And then I hope to have something out by Monday, where our next meeting is the 18th, correct? And yeah, I want to get it to you minimally, by the middle of next week, so you have a full week to review it.
Mr. Lindsay Pullen.
Yeah, if we have a few minutes, I'm wondering if we could go look at that definition of barricaded subject. Because I think that could be the substance of whatever our nice conversation is. And I don't want to string this out too long, but thank you, Captain. You're Captain now, right, Turner? No, you're Lieutenant. Sorry. So if someone seizes control of a location and they refuse to surrender, so if I go home, I'm trying to play it out here, right? Like, people get afraid, right? Suppose I go home and I threaten my partner, and my partner leaves and calls the cops.
Yeah.
And OPD comes, and my partner says, yeah, he's got a knife in there. Does that constitute a barricaded subject?
Technically, yes.
If you don't come out. If you don't come out, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now, is there anything that's unlawful that's occurred?
Yes, especially if it's like domestic, right? Like you've threatened your partner, and we've determined that the threat rose to the level of being a crime. So I think where the confusion is, and that's incumbent on us to clear things up, is there are different degrees of a barricade and different responses. So we encounter barricades every day in patrol. Hey, you know what? I had gotten to argue with my neighbor. He punched me in the face. He went inside his house, and then we go to contact the neighbor. We knock on the door, and he's like, "Kick rocks. I'm not talking to you." This guy is now a barricaded battery suspect. So a barricade doesn't qualify doing a tactical team call out. It's a term, but for tactical team call outs, there needs to be a certain level of severity categorically involved with that barricaded individual. So what's our response in patrol? There are times where we walk away. It's, you know what, we're not going to be kicking in a door in order to get this guy who punched his neighbor. We try to provide resources to the neighbor. Hey, are you going to be outside? Do you need to stick around for a while while you finish your yard work so you don't have any other conflict? We'll write the report, and we'll kind of go from there, but we're not going to be, kicking in a door for every person who just refuses to come out, nor are we going to make it a tactical team.
Okay. That's very helpful. I mean, it kind of, there's two things. One is it kind of brings back to what Jesse was saying earlier about the circumstances that call for or justify the bringing of a tactical team, right? That seems like that's a really important piece of that list of authorized uses, really important. And the other piece that stands out to what you just said, for me, is that there was an unlawful act, right? So the threat or the, someone, punch somebody in the face, that's an unlawful act, right? But
Yes.
the definition here doesn't actually say the person committed an unlawful act.
Yeah, I see that. I think it does kind of infer that, because when it says refuses to surrender to police custody, we only have the lawful ability to take people into custody when there's either an unlawful act, or say that we have the ability to seize them for, say, a mental health hold or something of that sort. So it's, I get it doesn't say
But
that.
I think making it explicit would be really important. And in fact, you just added something, right? Which is the conditions for a mental health hold. So
police custody can mean any multiple things, but when we say custody, that requires a seizure, and a Fourth Amendment seizure, and then you get into the reasons of why the police can seize.
So if someone is in a mental health crisis and they're suicidal, and they have an arm and they're alone in the building,
that is a possibility where
that's a barricade.
That is a barricade. The police have the lawful ability to seize that person. Now, the question then becomes, just like Lieutenant Trivio was talking about, what's the calculus for whether we are going to continue on our sort of police missions and using police tools to take that person into custody, or we are not. That is a separate question. Whether we can seize the person does not mean we necessarily will. And in fact, in our forced posture, we do have disengagement where we leave. Frequently something like that, where a person is suicidal, not a danger to others, by themselves, that's likely going to be a candidate for us disengaging and unfortunately leaving that person inside, especially if they're in their own home.
So I think it would be really helpful in the authorized uses section to deconstruct this a bit, because and the way that you have just done, really, because it's if the department is not going to do something, then authorizing use of an explosive device in a situation where the department really is not going to do that,
right?
Doesn't why have this sort of big ass term that could encompass a lot of different things that actually include some situations where the department is not going to use it?
Yeah, I'll definitely, when I'm scrubbing this document, look at what is being placed on the word barricaded, because for context, I think that there's an overemphasis on that word. So like right now, I'm a watch commander for West Oakland right now for second watch, and if one of my sergeants called me right now and said, "Hey, we got a barricade right now at 123 Happy Street," I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, because barricade essentially doesn't really mean anything. Hey, we have a murder suspect who's barricaded. What stands out is we have a murder suspect here. And the fact that they're barricaded, it adds a level of caution and a level of a threat level, because it means that there's a possibility that officers are going to have to go inside to get this guy. So the barricade simply means the person hasn't surrendered and they're in an area that we don't control. It doesn't categorically kick off like, oh, somebody is barricaded, hey, let's get the SWAT team. And if that's unclear in here, I'll flesh that out, because that's the last thing I want, is for an overemphasis of unnecessary weight being on the word, or a misplaced weight being on that word. Because a barricade is simply like a category of a type of person, somebody who hasn't surrendered and they're in a place that they control and we don't.
That suggests that barricade is always going to be in concert with something else, right? It's the use of an explosive device. It might be in a situation where there's a barricade, but that there's always going to be some other condition.
Yes, sir.
So I think that is also an important piece here, because if you have a list of bullet points that are authorized uses, it suggests that any one of them is a situation in which use would be authorized. And that doesn't sound like that's the case.
Okay. I know I'm not sharing my screen. I still have that document open. I'm making some notes based on this conversation. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we have the impact report. And I was just checking my email just to make sure that I had actually sent it around. Should we take a look at that? Or were there some final edits that y'all wanted to do before we went through it?
If it's okay, I think it would be good if we held on to it just for a bit more. And apologies for the delay, but obviously, Febble, if you have different thoughts.
I actually fully agree. And the reason why I say this is because this was a particular subject matter that very few people had expertise that we could actually initially, when we began the ad hoc, to get online. Now we have some very good reviewers, but they have not had the opportunity to review this. And I think that it would save a lot of time if we let them go through it first, and that would kind of advance our conversation next week.
Okay. Just, we have some time, but in the interest of starting the new year off right, I guess I'll give you all back the 24 minutes on this ad hoc. See you all next time on the 18th. I believe I've already set up the meeting, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. or whenever we finish all the work. Thank you all. Happy New Year. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Happy New Year.
Thanks,
Hey.
everyone.